of the questions that I'll ask a lot of sales leaders is what are how do you achieve and overcome an aspect of the sales process that fails 66% of the time. And this is not saying that 33% of the time you connect with people and 66% of the time you don't. This is saying that 66% of outreach efforts fail. So, that's emails, that's warm calls, it's in-person presentations. Those types of things fail more often than not. And it's an extremely difficult question for folks to answer, because if you look at it, it's a daunting number. And it's not created by me. This was a Harvard Business Review done, I think it was 2015. So the number probably has increased, because as we go through and look at the world today that we're reaching out to, it's vastly different than it was then. So, I'd like to see an updated number on this. I would think it would increase by now. But that's the reason for the conversation today. It's 20 years I've been talking to sales leaders and have been a sales leader myself, and conversations we have around of obstacles to get to objective or needs to get to objective. And it all boils down to the one answer that I've been getting very, very consistently is we just need more bats. And, I have a mental block when it comes to that particular answer, because I just don't believe it. And the reason I don't believe it is, I could anecdotally talk about when I played baseball. I wasn't very good at it, so I certainly didn't need more bats. But when you talk about professional baseball players and they're in slumps, you don't ever hear them talking about, I just need to get to the plate more. They talk about quality at bats. They talk about understanding the situation. They talk about understanding the pitch count, talk about understanding the base runners, understanding the out count, the inning, right? All of those different things, what the pitcher throws typically in a particular situation. So it's extremely situational and built around the quality of getting to bat. So 20 years and probably $20 billion in training and technology, we're still talking about we need more bats. And I think this arrives from the fact that people use their sales math. And if you follow me for a second, when you talk to folks, they say our put through rate is 10%. We have a conversion rate of 10%. It's 10% of everybody we talk to, we're going to sell. Right. Well, so in order for me to get the $10 million on an average contract value of $1 million, I need to sell 10 people. So I've got to talk to 100 people. Right. So I'm going to convert 10% of those. That's my sales math. And, you talk about your show rate, your sales accepted rate. You talk about all those different conversions and ratios that you want to look at. But the problem with averages is there's outliers in there as well, right? There's folks that do it really, really well and probably convert 24 to 25% of the time. There's people that convert less than 10. Why aren't we striving to be at the top of this spectrum? Why do we just accept that it's just going to be 10%? And part of the problem with accepting that number is the fact that when you look at it in that manner, you don't know where that 10% is going to fall, right? So a couple things we're going to talk about today: traditional outreach, true value of a lead, messaging that resonates, and executing the first call. This kind of drives into the value of a lead. By the time I get to the 90th call, if I haven't sold anybody as a sales rep, I'm going to be extremely, extremely ill prepared. I'm going to think it's just like every other lead that I've talked to, the 89 times. And I'm not going to show up to the call with two things that I think make a really good sales rep, which is preparedness and curiosity. I'm not going to be curious about what they do because I'm just going to think it's another bad lead. And I'm not going to be prepared because I think it's just another bad lead. So it's interesting when you look at that aspect. And so this is why I submit that it's not more at bats. We just need to see the ball better. We just need to talk to more quality people. And that's where traditional outreach fails us. And when you talk about traditional outreach in the sense, it's built around volume. The formula is solely built around volume. And we did this to ourselves as a sales industry. We did it on the sales side, and we've done it on the business development side, in my opinion. right? You take head count, you say, I've got, every rep I got 5 reps, we're at $5 million. So to get to 10, I need 5 more reps. Well, that we just talked about, all people are not created equal. There's outliers in there. But you hire 5 people, you don't hire 5 quality people. You hire head count to get to a number. That dilutes our field. It dilutes the ability for us to really make an impact in the sales environment. The same thing goes on the development side. When you talk about, if you've got to get to 100 people, I've got to create 100 conversations. If my conversation, if my dial to connect rate to conversation rate's 30%, I got to make 300 phone calls, right? So that's insane, and that leads us to dilution of outreach, and outreach fails because one thing we commonly see is we reach out to maybe 3, possibly 2, but certainly 1 person in the organization, and we're single point of failure. There's no negative consequence to that individual taking a phone call from me, taking a meeting from me, answering my phone call, returning my phone call, deleting my email, answering my email, whatever it may be. And that is a single point of failure. So when you look at traditional outreach being myopically focused on one individual, it becomes more and more difficult to infiltrate organizations. And when you look at what Gardner says, there's 13 to 14 people now in a sales transaction. That's a lot of people. I don't have that many people come to my parties. I mean, this is a lot of people. And when you're talking about selling a product or service, there are different personas. Obviously, there's different needs, right? There's different think, do, feels, and there's different priorities. So when you're single threaded into an account, you don't know who you're speaking to, if this is their core issue or problem. So really what you want to do is you want to be multi-threaded into an account. You want to identify multiple personas, and you want to be able to deliver the message to those folks in a very consistent fashion. And we'll talk about the effective piece of messaging later, but it's really, if you're reaching out to the organization, you cannot just single thread into the organization or multi-thread and variable your message, meaning that you can't deliver different messages to different people. You have to be able to deliver a consistent message, and we'll go through kind of what that messaging looks like. And my belief, again, this is all just the world according to Jason. So I'm certainly interested in any comments or thoughts or questions that anybody has. But the reality of the situation is, what we do as salespeople or business development folks is we go out and to infiltrate an organization, for lack of a better word. It sounds very militaristic, but when we're going into an organization, we might deliver a message on Wednesday to Gary, and Gary doesn't call me back, and whatever my cadence is, if it's 3 days follow-up or 5 days follow-up, I'm going to call Gary again. And my message obviously wasn't good the last time, so I'm going to deliver a different message to Gary. I might refer to some of the same things in that message that I referred to last time, but it's going to be different. And it might be a little cheeky because I didn't get a response, so I'll try to be funny. Well, there's no connectivity there, and there's no brand resonation, and there's no brand awareness and lift. What you add is dilution, right? If your message is not consistent and it's not delivered in a consistent fashion, then A, how does it resonate with the person? And then B, how is it shared throughout the organization? So that's going to be a piece that we'll talk about in the messaging side, but it's critical when not only to multi-prong, but to make sure that you're consistent in delivery. The other piece that you want to be multi-pronged, the other reason you want to be multi-pronged, I should say, is when you think about those 13 to 14 people, think about this number. 33% of them prefer 0 sales interaction. They'd prefer to buy everything online. This is the Amazon crowd. They don't want to go to the store. They don't want to interact with people. They just want to go out, get what they need, and go on about their way. So how do you take this number and figure out this number? So how do you figure out who the 33% is that you want to avoid because they want nothing to do with you, right? Well, you can't. So you identify the personas that you think are influencers or that can be, you know, the people that are going to help motivate and move the sale along internally, or people that just have the need. And you reach out to those folks again in a very consistent fashion. And because if you don't, how do they talk to one another on a level that resonates with what you're trying to solve for? And the answer is they don't, because it's disconnected. And again, you have further brand dilution, and you don't have any connectivity inside the organization, and they can't talk to one another. And the goal in multi-pronged outreach and consistent messaging is you want the organization to help you. We all know, we'll get into this in some of the first call execution beliefs, but we know that titles are not monolithic across organizations or industries. Neither are responsibilities. So we can't assume that every organization, the director of sales is who we need to talk to. And we can't assume that every director of sales cares about ramp time, right? So that leads us to the lack of consistency in messaging. And the real key around this piece is that when you don't talk to your prospects in the way that they view their challenge or problem, you're going to lose them. And another way of saying it is a feature and benefit is only a feature and benefit if it's important to the person you're talking to, right? So when looking for a new car, I'm not interested in highway miles because I live in a city. I'm interested in doesn't matter to me. You want to identify a common, and it's hard. It's difficult to identify anything in the sense of what people are going to feel important. You, again, going back to the think, do, feel, you don't know what everybody thinks, does, and feels. So you want to be able to identify a challenge. And the reason that's important, and you could take what we do, for instance, you know, one of the things that we sell is 20 to 30-minute conversations, authentic conversations with personas inside targeted accounts. And when we're talking to a prospect or we're outreaching to try and gain interest, we could say that we're the fastest known way to ramp a sales resource. But that's a benefit and a feature of the things that we do. And that may or may not be important. And that may or may not help us navigate throughout the organization. But if we talk about we overcome the top of the funnel challenge that plagues sales organizations from producing revenue, that speaks to development, marketing, sales. And if you deliver that message, even to an admin, they know the person that's important on that other side. They know how to help us navigate through the organization. They know who we should talk to next. And ultimately, you end up getting a schematic of an organization that kind of gives you an idea of who's going to be responsible for what and who can influence what. And we call that the social DNA at Frontline. So we understand how they deliver information to one another. We understand how they deliberate between things, and they understand who's responsible for what. So it's a key piece in messaging. And so I would always encourage you to identify a challenge so that your prospects can understand that this is what we solve for, and this is why we want to talk. To try and trick people into a conversation or try to heavy features and benefits, those are going to fail more often than not. Another thing I will tell you too, that I'm not a believer, if you ever get pinned into, if you are in development and you get pinned into, well, tell me what this call is about. Stick with the objective at hand. The objective is to get the next conversation. The objective is to schedule a detailed time. Don't go into the 30-second pitch, because I can tell you, if you can tell the value of your product or service in 30 seconds, it's not worth me buying. So don't be tricked into the elevator pitch. I've been selling for 20 years and I've never sold anything in an elevator, and I never will. And I haven't sold anything in 30 seconds. So I would avoid that. Make sure you stick with the objective at hand, which is to gain interest to get to a bigger meeting, right? So, and you can do that by, again, delivering consistent messaging that identifies the challenge. And messaging gets diluted in a lot of ways. And one of the ways I talked about a little bit earlier is we change it every time because we think it's like talking to my wife. I might change my verbiage every time because I want to get a reaction from her, but that doesn't help. It only hurts. So it's the same when you're reaching out. It's not going to resonate. It doesn't build awareness to what you're trying to solve for, and there's no connectivity. The other piece really is you have a lack of clarity in the organizational structure, as I stated before, and it creates a lot of guesswork, and there's a lot of variables in outreach when you deliver multiple versions of a message, and you can't scale guesswork. It's not possible. And I know there's probably some folks on here that did development work in the past or do it now, and virtually raise your hand when you look at how many times have you said, well, I've been sending this message, and I'm going to send this message now, and then I'm going to send this message, and you get a response. And then that message is shared throughout the whole team and saying, this is the email we got a response from, the voicemail we got a response from, that everybody starts to adapt that message. Well, that's guesswork. I'm going to assume, right or wrong, but I'm pretty sure that we're probably more right than we are wrong, that message had nothing to do with the response. It might have had a snippet in there, but it wasn't the overall message. It was the timing. It was, I just walked out of a meeting that this is a high priority for us now, right? This is now budgeted for, and I'm going to pay attention to something that comes through. It's not necessarily mean that my messaging was so spot on that they responded. And it certainly doesn't mean that everybody needs to start using it. Again, you increase guesswork, and then what happens? Somebody ultimately gets disappointed and disgruntled about using that message. They change it up a little bit, and then they get a response. Well, it might have something to do. It might have been their 500th outreach, right? It might have something to do with, again, timing, budgeting, those types of things. So, be consistent in your message and deliver a challenge to make sure that these, you can help navigate through the organization correctly. Now the byproduct of all of this work we're doing and all we're talking about is the first call. And as I stated earlier, I think, I believe there are 10 characteristics that make a really good sales rep, but 2 of them and my top 5 are preparedness and curiosity. And when you show up to a call, you need to be prepared. You need to be curious about what the person on the other end of the call does. But the preparedness piece goes back to the value of a real lead. So when you think about what you deliver to your sales folks, people are not going to be prepared when they get to the 89th call and it's the same version of the 88 calls before that. It's just human nature. We're going to show up already defeated. So pay attention to your sales math, help your folks build the true value of a lead, make sure that there are parameters and gates to get folks to execute the first call appropriately. And I think we had some clients on the call, and so they can certainly attest the fact that we preach loud and often about how critical the first call is. It's arguably the hardest thing to create is the first conversation, but once you create it, you've got to execute it correctly. And there's 2 things that you do, and I don't care what the industry is. There's 2 things in the framework of kicking off a call that is critical. And that's setting an agenda and verifying time. And they're very simple reasons. You set an agenda, the people are not wondering what this call is about. They're not going to interrupt you and cut off your thought process or your conversation. They're going to understand what they're going to get out of the call and what the objective is. And verifying time is simple. How many times have you ever run into the end of a call where you're like, hey, we're running up on the end of the hour. Do you have any questions? I want to be respectful of your time. Well, you haven't been. Right? We got 30 seconds to try and wrap up. So always verify time. Keep a watch on 5-minute mark. When you have 5 minutes left, start to wrap up. And the reason this is critical is the goal of the first call is to understand challenges, right? Understand their view of those challenges. But most importantly, it's to get the next call scheduled. So always wrap up early, make sure you verify their time, and then always have 2 times and dates available. Don't, get them in their calendar right then and there. People are going to have a harder time saying no when you're on the phone with them. It happens more often than I care to admit when I see some folks don't get to that point. And well, I'll email you some more information and give you some times next week that work, and you never hear from that person again. They magically disappear. The other piece is understanding roles and responsibilities. This is key, as I said before. Titles are not monolithic across industry or organizations. So you want to understand what their roles are and what they're responsible for, and who they're responsible for, and what those folks do. And the other piece that I would tell you is, and this is critical, when you get to the talk listen ratio, the old saying, be interested, not interesting. I'm a firm believer in that. And I always like to say, I go for the 80-20. Right? I want my folks to listen 80% of the time and talk 20% of the time on the first call. And there's easy ways to do that, but one of them is certainly don't be like me and talk the entire time. What you do is you dig into answers. And I always refer to it as at the whys. You've got to understand the whys. So, and what I mean by that, and this is a really good example I'll give you when we're talking to folks, and I'll use today for instance, more at bats. That's what their challenge is. That's what their goal is. Okay, well, I've got a sales team that hears that and they get happy ears and they run straight to, well, that's what we do. Lead generation. We build conversations. We do this. But what happens if I try to understand why? Why do you feel that more at bats is important? Well, because I've got a $10 million goal and I'm converting 10% of the time. And our sales cycle is longer than it should be. All right. Well, what do you think is contributing to that? Why is your sales cycle longer than it should be? And what do you think it should be? You start to understand how they feel about what their challenge is. And what ultimately can happen is then you ultimately become the company that's going to help them solve that problem versus the company that's just going to sell them lead generation in our instance. So you help them overcome a challenge. And their challenge may not just be more at bats. And I firmly believe that it's not. So I try to get my team to dig deep into the problem to understand where is it. Because if you take a 10% conversion rate, you raise it to 8%, you don't need to talk to 100 people. But if you still talk to 100 people, now you got 8 new sales versus 10. So your sales math can be used to reverse engineer what you want to get to versus where you think you need to be. Because I can tell you, if you can increase the quality of the conversations that you're having, you don't have to continue to have the bad conversations. They're going to happen, but you don't have to have as many of them. And if you throw more volume into the market, all you're going to do is dilute your brand, dilute your message, continue to increase guesswork, be severely handicapped in scalability because scaling is not adding more of the same bad stuff.